Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a empezar dándoos la bienvenida a todos vosotros. Ya sabéis, soy Arcadio Gutiérrez, el director del club. Encantados que estéis aquí. Muchas gracias a Heymi, que siempre es bienvenido aquí a España, ¿no? y que ha estado hace muy poco. Espero que todos estéis bien y, como hemos anunciado, vamos a cambiar, ¿no? A hacer esta sesión en inglés, porque la idea fundamental es que Heymi presente esta actualización que han hecho del informe de renovables. Okay, I'm going to switch to English because Heymi Bahar is coming here to explain this new report about the renewables, an update of the international market and the Spanish market. We consider that it's good in that time to participate in this association of renewables energy. Heymi is a good friend of us. He came here in February to present the renewable report. And every year, the International Energy Agency is coming out with all the report in renewable, but now this year is a little bit different. It's a little bit worried, and that's why that's why they are putting out more reports than ever before. And that's why our consideration with him, we are trying to present all of them. I think this is a new format I explained before. Heymi is going to explain, going to present this report, the update on the national renewables energy. After this, we are going to have 5 minutes each one of the association to talk about the COVID era, no? And about talking about the future. No? We are going to throw in all of them this question about the future. And now you can participate in a Q&A section, and you can send the question to the open chat, or you can send privately to Pablo de Juan to translate all of them about this. Well, Heymi, you know him. I think it's the 5 or more times he is responsible for this renewable energy and this report in the International Energy Agency. He worked before for the World Bank and for several institutions. He comes from Istanbul, but he's a Spaniard. No, he's a good friend of us. Once again, the floor is yours, Heymi.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen.
Well, try it. Okay, it's okay.
So,
full screen.
Thank you very much, Arcadio, and thank you very much for all the participants, Javier, Alejandra, and Heiki. Looking forward to the discussion after my presentation. I presented this report, probably some of you participated on the 28th of February. Although it's been only 3-4 months, it looks like a decade now. Since then, the world has changed drastically. We usually publish this outlook, this 5-year outlook, I will say, every October. And I usually try to come around December to present this in the Spanish Energy Club. But this year, right 3 months after my presentation, we are here and I'm showing you the results that are completely different than what I presented 3 months ago. And we are only going towards only this year and next year. I'm going to explain in my presentation why we did not do 2025. In one sentence, it is quite difficult to say something about 2025. That's why we focused on this year and next year to see the impact of COVID-19. So I want to start with the overall energy demand situation that we see under the coronavirus crisis. As you know, in several parts of Europe, United States, India, electricity demand dropped by 20 to 40% depending on the country in certain months. Overall energy demand dropped by 20 to 30% depending on the country. And we see this energy shock picking up slowly in the coming months with the economy recovering. But in our estimations of energy demand, we chose to use the worst case scenario of IMF that they published in mid-March, April. We did not choose their base case scenario for a particular reason, because we believe that the economic recovery will be more like a U-shaped one rather than a V-shaped one. So we will see a slow recovery of the economy, because this is a bit different than the financial crisis. So in that sense, we estimated a few months ago in April, actually, when we released the report of Global Energy Review, we estimated about 6% decline in global energy demand in 2020. This has never been seen over the last 70 years since World War II. And the reason behind this is a shock, a double or triple shock on both the industry and people staying at home, and basically the demand of energy declining significantly. And the third, the transportation sector, especially aviation and tourism, has never seen such a huge hit over the last 70 years. And in many advanced economies, these sectors are the revival part of the economy. So we expect a fall 7 times greater than the 2009 financial crisis in energy demand. Why is much more different than the energy in the financial crisis? The answer is actually very simple. In the 2009 financial crisis, United States, European Union were affected really badly. But when you look at the emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil at the time, they recovered quite fast. So they pushed the energy demand up globally in this financial crisis period. So that's why we saw actually did not see a huge demand in energy, decline in energy demand. So when we look at how the 2020 will look like for various fuels, obviously fossil fuels gets the biggest hit in a multiple way. The reason is quite actually simple. They are connected directly to the demand, both for electricity, but industry and transport demand as well. We expect historical record level declines for oil, gas, and coal demand, while we expect small decline in nuclear. The only technology that we see growing is renewables. Here, renewables, we include all sectors, which means electricity, heat, and transport. But while heat and transport sectors will see a decline, electricity will see an increase. The reason is quite simple. We had a record level growth of capacity additions in 2019, which became operational fully in 2020. So those projects is giving a boost to renewable generation globally. On top of that, as you know, in Spain as well, most of the renewable technologies have priority dispatch to the grid. Even if there is no priority dispatch to the grid, they have zero marginal cost, so they are dispatched first before fossil fuels. While we see fossil fuels dialing down their generation, renewables keep generating in most of the markets, actually in all markets. That's why we see a decline. But however, the growth of renewable energy will slow down, as you can see in this picture. And we try to look at more deep into this slowdown and what does it mean. That's why we did this renewable energy outlook, which looks at the capacity additions of renewables in the coming years and biofuels. The world since mid-February, starting in China, is under partial or full lockdown or social distancing measures. These measures do not necessarily mean that construction of renewable energy plants were stopped or the manufacturing facilities were stopped everywhere. In Spain, some of the manufacturing facilities were stopped for a while, then restarted. In most of Europe, the picture is mixed. In France, for instance, construction has been stopped completely, while India has been stopped completely for a while. In China, there's a big gap in multiple provinces because of the delays of the supply chain. But overall, one message is clear that we see a 2 to 3 months of clear slowdown in construction activity and supply chain disruptions, which are still being felt across the world, less for PV than wind, because PV is mostly China heavy in terms of the manufacturing, and the world is coming back slowly to normal in terms of the logistics and stuff. But for wind, the situation is much more complicated because the supply chains are much more connected. In order to produce a turbine, many companies are buying parts from China, China buys from Europe, Europe buys from United States. So we are basically seeing a more connected supply chain compared to PV. So it's more affected, but things are going back to normal. But the main issues that we see is this 2 to 3 months of delay. That's why we basically were expecting in 2020 an increase in capacity additions going about 200 gigawatts for all renewable energy technologies. Because of particular reasons, there were big policy deadlines in China, in the United States, and in some countries in the European Union at the end of the incentive schemes. So developers were rushing to deploy their projects to be commissioned. And this coronavirus comes to a point where it's very, very critical time in the renewables for particular 3 reasons. First of all, renewable energy sector, especially wind and solar, in 2020 are becoming in many markets subsidy free. They were basically many projects that are being developed outside of the policy schemes. Spain was a great example of this in 2019. And we were expecting 2020 and 2021 going this way. China were phasing out the incentives. US wind incentives were coming to an end. Corporate PV market was booming, and so on and so forth. The first one. The second one, we saw the offshore wind market becoming really slowly a global market, spreading out from Europe to United States and China and other Asian countries. So it was getting ready to be a global technology in terms of deployment. And the third one, might mention quickly, there was a big deployment of projects outside of the subsidy schemes with innovative financing structures and renewable technologies, especially wind and solar, accepting more risk, market risk, many parts of the world, including Spain as well. Once we close the 2019 and entering into 2020, the situation is basically changed completely due to COVID-19, and we actually revised down our forecast by 13%. Now we expect about 170 gigawatts of new capacity additions in the world globally, most of which coming from wind and PV. But good news is that renewables are showing an important resilience. We expect a rebound in 2021. Most of these projects, according to our forecast, will come back online in 2021 because these pipelines are already financed, the majority. So we expect some of these projects to be delayed, but still to come online in 2021. When we see the year-on-year change in terms of 2020 compared to 2019, we expect outside of hydropower, all renewable technologies to slow down in terms of capacity additions. And I would like to differentiate the type of renewable technologies here because COVID-19 basically hits them differently. The technologies which have long lead times, such as hydropower, biomass, and offshore wind, are less affected by this COVID-19 because they can shelter these kind of 2 to 3 months delays easily. In our forecast, these projects were already at the end of their project development process, so we see them coming online with few delays, but they can shelter those. But the technologies who have the shortest investment cycle, such as rooftop PV, is hit the most. Globally, we expect 15% less capacity growth in 2020 for rooftop PV, for a particular reason, because the main investors of rooftop PV are individuals, households, or small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the most hit in terms of financing liquidity in this crisis. And investing in a PV plant on their roof may not be the first priority for them in this crisis situation. We talk with a lot of investors and developers and small companies, and then they told us, I think in the previously Alejandro also agreed with me on this, we can discuss this. They said that they are going to change their attitude in terms of new investments because some of the projects may be delayed further and canceled. For onshore wind and utility scale PV, most of this decline that we see is due to delays, and some of these projects are expected to come online in 2021. We see a jump for both wind and utility scale PV in 2021, actually compensating for most of these delays. However, we expect some of the projects that are not financed yet to be postponed beyond 2021 because the financing conditions in 2020 are quite challenging and will continue to be challenging, especially before the stimulus packages are announced. Already today, there are only few stimulus packages that are announced related to energy packages. So we are still looking forward to them. The slowest recovery, on the other hand, will happen in the rooftop PV. The reasons I mentioned, this will depend on the economic recovery as a whole, but also the new incentive schemes that can be provided by the governments. And one note on hydropower here, hydropower is giving an important hand to this rebound in 2021, but don't let this figure to mislead you. The 90% of this 2021 expansion is coming from massive scale mega hydropower plants in China. They are really coming online in 2021. Overall, when I mentioned that we expect some of these utility scale and rooftop PV projects to be either postponed beyond 2021 or canceled as a whole, that's why our overall forecast for these 2 years combined, we revised down by 10% compared to the forecast that I presented 3-4 months ago. The reason behind this is depends on the market. Overall, we revised down our forecast by 40 gigawatts or 10%, as I mentioned. I would like to highlight one important exception is United States. You can ask, it's not very intuitive to see United States being hit so much by COVID, but still having a more positive forecast than before. The reason is actually not related to COVID-19. The reason is policies. In Q4 2019, before COVID, United States really saw an incredible financing of new projects because the incentives are phasing out. First point. Second point, there was an extension of the production tax credit for wind projects 1 more year, again, before COVID-19. And on top of that, United States is maybe only among the few countries who actually gave flexibility to renewable developers to commission their projects later than 2020 without losing their incentives. So in that sense, actually, United States make the, I would say, right moves to give flexibility to renewable developers. Europe is hit one of the most. There are 2 reasons behind that. The first one, 2019 was an exceptional year for renewable capacity deployment in the European Union. And the reason is quite simple. Actually, it's in front of you because Spain added about 6 gigawatts of capacity additions in 1 single year from 0. So this gave an incredible boost to European Union capacity additions in 2019. However, in 2020, the picture obviously looks different, both in Spain, in also other places. So we are basically seeing this impact. One. The second one is European Union PV sector is very rooftop heavy. Maybe not in Spain, but in Germany, in Netherlands, in Nordic countries, in France, the majority of the growth is actually from distributed PV applications. And as I said, this will be hit most. And the third point for the European Union is that there's still a lot of policy uncertainties at the European Union in many markets. We can start with Spain. Spain had an auction, then stopped. Then there are already a lot of markets that, there are a lot of projects that came either merchant or corporate PPAs. There's a plan of the government, but not an auction schedule yet. So this creates a loop in the pipeline usually and makes for the investors the situation quite difficult. The same situation was in Germany. There was an auction scheme, but the subsidy extension was not approved since last week. So this gave a big uncertainty to the investors. France announced multiple auctions, but did not implement them on time. So we saw a chain of announcements, but less implementation by the European countries. Hopefully the new act on recovery will change this picture. But I must say that the announcements are great, but how these will be negotiated and approved is a different question mark. We hear a lot of discussions at the European Union level that some countries do not agree that this package should go to renewables or energy sector as a whole. So we will see how this unfolds. The same situation in China. China was phasing out the incentives, and it basically was aiming at zero subsidy renewable sector, especially for onshore wind and PV beyond 2020. Obviously, most of these zero subsidy projects are having trouble in financing because China did not announce a stimulus package on energy yet. So this is also a big question mark. And India, the utilities who are buying the power from renewables are in very bad shape financially, thus making very difficult and uncertain how they are going to get paid. So there's a big off-taker risk in India. And many people are asking what happened in the first 5 months of the year in terms of the integration of renewables. Everybody was expecting that demand is declining, renewables are coming to the market. Did we see energy security issue? Actually, we see COVID-19 enabled a fast forward look at the future electricity markets. I'm repeating this, I will repeat this again because the sudden shock of demand basically brought in Germany, Italy, and multiple European Union countries, the share of renewables reaching the limits on an hourly basis. You can see in this figure very clearly the blue line is completely different than the green line in the lockdown period compared to the last year. And there's a big impact of this COVID-19 here. In Germany and Italy, in most of the European Union countries, we did not see any electricity security issue or blackout. Although in California, as you can see, the difference is not that high. California saw the record level curtailment of PV and wind during the lockdown period. The reason is not energy security or electricity security. It was mostly the economic situation. There was few days that were very sunny. And in these periods, the duck curve deteriorated in California. And then the system operator basically switched off some of the utility scale PV projects because of the economic dispatch reasons. So that's why we saw a 77% curtailment in April in California, never seen before in the history. So this actually has an impact in some markets, but not related to security reasons. It's mostly related to economic reasons in California. So obviously the demand is picking up, but also summer is coming. As you all know, the PV generation in summer is actually more problematic than wind in winter. in terms of the grid integration. So we will see how this basically unfolds. I would like to say a few words on biofuels. This sector has been growing over the last 2 decades, and both on ethanol and biodiesel side. But in 2020, actually, biofuel sector will get a huge shock in terms of the growth. We expect 13% decline in the production, which has never seen over the last 2 decades. It's for the first time. And the reason is that IEA expects about 9% decline in gasoline demand in 2020 and a 6% decline in diesel demand overall in the world in 2020. So obviously most of the biofuels in Europe, in the United States and Brazil are blended with those products. So with demand declining for those, we see an important decline in the production. And for biofuels, there's a spillover effect because it's connected to the agricultural sector. And we see in many markets, various companies cannot have the liquidity to collect money from the sales to invest back into the agriculture for the next harvest. So this has an important impact. We expect ethanol to be affected more than biodiesel and HVO. The reason is quite simple, because most of the hit in this very big lockdown period came from the gasoline for the transportation of individuals and others. So in that sense, trucks still operated carrying several goods, so diesel continued to keep the demand up. In 2021, we expect levels going back to 2019 with the going back and rebound of the economy. This is obviously a good news, but still our forecast is lower than before, because we see already the seeds of countries scaling back the policies, especially in big markets such as Southeast Asia, where the countries already said that they were not going to implement more ambitious policies that they announced before. One point on the investment side. As I said, renewables are much more resilient than fossil fuels, as I tried to show in my presentation. However, we still expect a decline in the investment in renewables or clean energy technologies, including battery storage. So renewable power investment is expected to decline by 10% in 2020, but in percentage terms, actually the biggest hit comes for biofuels and heat and energy efficiency. Obviously, these are extremely necessary for the clean energy transitions. However, one good news is that the fact that fossil fuel investment goes down so much, the share of clean energy technologies in overall energy investment will reach a record level high in 2020 in terms of the shares. So it's quite impressive growth. I would like to finish my presentation with a few points on the role of governments. We have been discussing before this call about certain government actions. As I said, we did not look at 2025 exactly because of this figure. This figure, we keep the full pipeline of all renewable projects. Here I'm showing wind and PV up to 2025. And in our pipeline in the next 5 years, only 30% of the projects we have, wind and solar projects, are contracted. They are not fully financed, but at least they have some kind of a policy scheme, or they have a auction result, and so on and so forth. The other 70% is basically needs to be done. And we divided this up into two. The half of this is government plans. So the promises that government made to the industry, they announced that they will implement X, Y, Z schedule. They said that they will allocate this much money on feed-in tariffs, or any other feed-in premium schemes, green certificates, and so on and so forth. So these announced plans obviously now have a question mark whether they will be implemented fully or when they will be implemented. On top, there is an important challenge that changes the picture drastically, is low gas prices. European Union has never seen such low gas prices in its history. A similar situation is true for obviously other countries, in Japan as well, in Asia. So this raises a question for the governments, which we received, by the way, from several governments, why to do any more auctions on renewables when there is no demand, overcapacity, and low gas prices in place. So can we basically do the transition with gas, wait a little bit more, burn cheap gas, use the plants that are already in place, and then simply move after? The second part is the private sector-led investments. This is mainly corporate PPAs or merchant investments. These are actually a big part of the pipeline in the future. If I did this figure 3 years ago, private sector-led investments would have represented only 5%. But now it is a big part, and especially in Spain, it's a huge part of the market today. And in many other markets, there are many projects in our pipeline that are either will not accept subsidies, so they will go for a merchant plants, or they have a short-term contract, usually less than 10 years, through corporate PPAs, and they are taking the risk. Obviously, many of these projects are riskier than the 20-year feed-in tariff or auction contracts because they have a merchant tail. And there are two big challenges that we expect for these projects. The first one is obviously the demand decline. So demand is lower. So will they need additional capacity to contract? The second one is electricity prices are so low right now, and the recovery is so uncertain. So they may delay some of the investments and not invest now, maybe in the future beyond 2025. And the third one is emerging challenges of financing, because most of the investors of renewable energy projects, especially these corporate PPAs, are small and medium-sized companies. Of course, there are Iberdrolas, Enels that invest a lot in these, but there is a big chunk that is coming from medium-sized companies. And what they expect is a big financing challenges and liquidity challenges in the coming year with the economic crisis. So it remains a question mark in terms of this. After all these challenges, I would like to finish with CO2 emissions. Obviously, renewables will grow slowly, but still grow. And fossil fuels are declining. So in relative terms, renewables are best performing in this crisis. And the fact that we will see energy demand declining, renewables still going on, and fossil fuels are scaling back, we expect an historical decline of CO2 emissions since World War II, about 8% in 2020. But this is nothing to celebrate because this is not a structural change. This is a demand shock. That's why it's extremely important to keep in mind for the governments to have an idea of what to do to make this a structural change. The history shows that in all the economic crises or oil shocks, there is a big rebound of emissions. So are we going to see this in 2021 is a big question mark we are asking ourselves. And we are working with the governments right now to make sure that the rebound of economy does not mean the rebound of emissions significantly, to see another historical high of emissions in the world. On this note, I would like to finish my presentation. I leave you with certain concluding remarks that are written that I mentioned. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to have a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heymi. As always, it was a very strong and good presentation. Now we thought that it would be good to know about the Spanish landscape. That's why we are inviting our guests here, and Anna is going to present our guests, and after this we will have this Q&A section. But you can finish the share. Anna, please, yours the floor.
Thank you, Arcadio, and thank you, Heymi. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Ana Padilla and work at the Spanish Energy Club. I think Heymi gave us a very good update of what is going on globally. on the renewable energy market. And it's the time now to talk about Spain, as Arcadio said. And for that, we have three very good speakers that I'm sure you know very well, but please let me to introduce them briefly. We have Javier Alberto Muñoz. I can see him there. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
He's Public and Institutional Relations Director at APA Renewables Association, where he works since 2008. He studied physical science and has 20 years of experience in telecom and energy in different areas. We have also Alejandro Heymi Wilster. Sorry, I'm gonna follow the program. Heymi Wilster.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Yeah, we can see you. He's Energy Climate Change Policies Director at the AEE, the Wind Energy Association. He's graduated in political science, has a master in international relations, and holds an executive program on sustainability from Harvard. The last person we have this afternoon is Alejandro Lavanda. Hello, Alejandro.
Hi.
He's the Director of Studies at UNEF, the Solar PV Association. He holds an industrial engineer degree on Polytechnic University of Madrid and has a master in power sector regulation of ICAE comillas. Before joining UNEF, worked in consultancy. So thank you to the three of you for being with us this afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be your moderator. And I have two questions for you. The first is related to the COVID crisis, the COVID-19. I would like to know if you think this crisis is going to have an impact on the development of renewables in the short term in Spain. We heard a lot about the international level, so we want to focus now on Spain. And the second is concerning the Spanish integrated national plan and the climate change law. I would like to know which are, from your point of view, the necessary elements to accomplish its objective on renewables. I know you could speak a long time about this, but the big challenge this afternoon is to do it in 5 minutes. So I think you have to go really into the very key point. I will be controlling the time, so if you pass the limit, I will let you know. And we can follow the same order as in the program. So Javier, when you want to take the floor.
I will try to get the 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Heymi Bahar for the interesting presentations. It's been very clear. And it seems to me that we share most of the conclusions of the report. Corona will affect all the economy sectors, but renewables, due to its resilience, are not the most hurted by the pandemic. Thank you very much, Arcadio, and all the team behind Enerclub to count on APA Renovables. And as Heymi Bahar has explained, Corona has been an earthquake to all the economy sectors, and energy and electricity are not oblivious of this situation. As Mr. Bahar has exposed, we will see this year the first annual decline in 20 years. Net capacity additions will decline by 13%, with 17% decline of solar PV and 12% decline of wind power. My friends of the wind and PV associations will talk about this later, but as APA Renovables, I should talk of the situation of all the technologies. And the situation is that we come from a year that has been a national record for renewables in Spain, but we were already facing a stopper. And that stopper in the horizon was not the Corona, but the short-term and middle-term planification. I want to share 2 slides. Now you're seeing the net capacity integration of renewables year to year. So, as you can see, we have suffered in the past for stop-and-go policies, and that's what we can see in the slide. The government is working now very hard in the regulation and the new auctions, but the truth is that the political instability lived in Spain doesn't help our business. Answering the first question, do you think COVID will have an impact on development of renewables in short term? Yes, we think that it will have an impact, especially in certain technologies like self-consumption, but the lack of short-term and middle-term planification will have a higher impact. We can see it here. The development of EV, the CSP, we are very, very, we have a lot of importance, the government policies. So it will have an impact, the COVID, but the planification will have a higher impact. Regarding the second question, what are the elements to accomplish the PNIEC renewable objectives for 2030? Well, that would be the smooth transition that we would like to the objectives, to the goals, but the experience say that it won't be the case. So I think that we won't see a smooth transition to the objectives. What are the elements? First, political consensus and agreement among political parties. We have the goals fixed in the 2030 horizon, but we have to work on the stability of the laws, the stability of the regulatory framework. Second, related to the regulatory framework, is the revenue visibility. The PNIEC has very high figures of investment, 241,000 million euros, 241 American billions, which of them 90,000 millions, 90 billions of euros will be renewable projects. If the companies doesn't see stability and how the revenue will come, they won't invest. And the third, after the political consensus and the revenue visibility, is a detailed plan of how we are going to incorporate the renewable energy, respecting the different aspects of the different technologies, specific auctions by technology, and of course, the uncertainties. When Heidi has talked about improving investor confidence or providing certainty, is words that I could have said myself. What will happen with surpluses of wind or PV? How we are managing a pool with more than 50,000 megawatts of new renewables? And of course, how we are facing the biggest challenge of all, that are renewables in transport and heating and cooling. With electricity, we won't achieve the goals. 10 seconds for the 5 minutes. For our association, the electricity integration is not a technical issue. We don't think it's the main challenge. As we have had in April more than 70% of renewable electricity in some hours. We need political agreements and planifications to achieve the goals. And that go much farther than the electricity ones. Renewables can create thousands of jobs and help in the economic development, but the regulatory framework is critical.
Okay.
And that's all, 5 minutes.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, okay, Heikki, is now your turn. If you're ready, you have the same question and same time when you want.
Okay, thank you for giving the association the opportunity to speak at this webinar. I enjoyed very much the presentation by Heymi. Actually, it's very enlightening of what is the situation at global and also at regional level with the development of renewables and also of other energies. And to answer rapidly the questions that you were posing, Anna, I would say that there are certain issues that have to be taken into consideration when we speak about the Spanish market. As also Javier was saying, we have had this stop during 4 years where there was no investment in renewables, and then we had the auctions that were due to come to mature. The projects were due to mature in 2019, 2020. And well, the first issue is, of course, that those that had to be ready by 2020 have been impacted by the COVID crisis and somehow have been delayed, but probably only by a few months. So some of them might be able to get in 2020. So for projects that have a lot of inertia, like for instance, wind farms, I mean, the delays in Spain are, in this case, only, we are talking about months. But in the case of, if we look at a longer term, we see that there is a problem, there is a gap, a regulatory gap between the previous auctions that were supposed to achieve the compliance of Spain with the 2020 objectives, and the start of the next, let's say, round of auctions that were supposed to start the investment for 2021. Those auctions have not been done, and now we are starting to hear that there might be some auctions at the end of the year, but we haven't seen still the new design that the government is thinking about. So we have this gap between the past system and the new system that needs to be in place in order to start for all the renewable sectors to start working. And this is, of course, is going to create, for especially for wind power, this is going to create, let's say, this gap, because there are no signals for 2021. So we have been asking the government to accelerate the development of legislation in this case, but all these problems with the elections and COVID have made it more difficult to approve these necessary changes in the law. We have, at the moment, we have at very short term 3 problems in Spain. Is that the market is not giving the signals to invest. That's one of them. And the reason behind is because there is not enough demand to have high prices in the market, in the power market. And also the gas price, as was mentioned by Heymi, is so low that it has not been seen before in the Spanish market. So this is making difficult to make investments through PPAs, because the prices are so low and the futures also. So that's why the obvious consequence is that the government has to step in order to promote these investments, and in order to do that, it has to organize auctions. So everything, as you can see, is connected. And for the future, it's very important to achieve the 2030 objectives, that the law that is currently in the Congress has an absolute majority of support from all political parties, as Javier was saying, because otherwise you might see these stop and go periods and those are not good in order if you want to achieve the objectives for 2030. And something that is very important and that is missing in that law is the fiscal. We need to have a very strong fiscal signals that channel the investments from polluting and emitting technologies to clean technologies, to energy efficiency, and to also other type of solutions in order to reduce emissions. So in general terms, you will need to see more emphasis in the law about electrification, especially for transport. We need to come out from this crisis with a cleaner transport, and also we need processes, start thinking about industrial processes that use more electricity. This is fundamental in order to achieve the decarbonization in all the sectors. And I have spent my 5 minutes, but I hope I said everything I meant to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Heikki. Yes. Now, Alejandro, if you want to start with your 5 minutes.
Okay, I don't know if I'm using all the 5 minutes, but still.
Yeah, okay.
First question, regarding the impact of COVID, what we see from UNEF. Well, first of all, thanks the club for inviting us, and thanks my colleagues for the value insights that they are giving us this afternoon. But well, how we see COVID. We see impact on the projects, on PV projects, depending on the degree of development. The project is under construction. Yeah, the highest impact will be a delay on commissioning. I don't know, 2, 3, 6 months. That will depend on the degree of of the delays at the size of the projects. If the project is under permitting procedures, it's true that the administration is now getting awake again and getting on and on and on, and that even during COVID, we know that some projects have been continuing their development, their administrative procedures, but not all of them are going on again. And for them, maybe most of the projects will be connected in second half 2020 or first half 2021. That will depend on the size and the development, the degree of development of each project. But the problem with the COVID is, some of my colleagues have been telling this before, is the impact of electricity prices. What if we see the impact on the higher degree of renewable penetration in the market as a fast forward of future, as Heymi was saying? What if we see this as the new normal? The other thing is, in the last 2 years, we have had a strong development activity in Spain, and financial entities were starting to have trust again in this kind of vehicle, in the renewable energy projects, and particularly in the solar PV. But what will happen if these entities do not have the same degree of trust in the next years? What will happen if the conditions of the equity or the debt are harder? That will be a longer term impact that we will have to analyze in the coming months. But we from UNEF, we already know that these entities are increasing the difficulty ratios, lowering the debt ratios and stuff. So we will see what the final impact of this. And regarding the national energy plan, Heymi was saying that there is policy uncertainty in Europe. I don't really agree with that. In Spain, we have the policy, the 2030 targets. We have the NCEP. We have the government has done really good work on the national climate and energy plan, which was welcomed by the European Commission as one of the most ambitious. But now we lack regulation. In that, I agree more with Heikki. We now lack the regulation to make this policy true, at least in the electricity generation sector. We from UNEF, I think we highlight two pieces of regulation that we lack the most. First, the network access regulation, which is creating an excess of permits and excess of requests, and a lot of permits being rejected at the moment, and this degree of uncertainty on how many of these projects are real, how many of these are just speculative purposes. And the other one is auctions, and we link this with COVID in order to lessen this uncertainty of the next years. I think the most useful policy measure will be auctions that will also eliminate this degree of not knowing if the next year we will have 6 gigas and the next one we will have only 2, or the next year we'll have 10 and the next year we have 1 giga. If the government has a clear view on the next 5 years with some auctions calendar, as is in the National Climate and Energy Plan, all the agents in the sector, and most importantly the suppliers, all the technology suppliers of these plants, will have more uncertainty, more certitude, for the next years.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you to the three of you for being so concrete. I think you have been very clear. There is many messages you have in common, like political consensus. They need to go now to detailed regulation, agreement between parties, revenues visibility, the importance of options by technologies, need for signals, etc. So, but I'm afraid the time for session is over. I think we will have the chance to go deeper on some of the issues you have mentioned. But we can pass now to the debate with the rest of the participants if you want. Arcadio, if you want to say something with your microphone, you have to switch off. Arcadio, yes, I'm doing for. Okay, now.
Okay, so right, it's on now. I think, Heymi, you can see the landscape here in Spain. This is CC, and now is the time for Q&A section, and Pablo has collected some questions from the people, and the people could raise the hand, and we can see there if they can ask Heymi or whatever.
Yeah,
Pablo, it's your floor.
More than directed questions, can be kind of like a debate between all of you. There is a very big issue here in the questions, which has to do with market design. You all talked about this. You talked about having revenue visibility. You talked about market not giving the correct price signals. What can we do about this? And Heymi, they're asking you if there is a benchmark example in the world which you think is adequate for a market design in order for the renewable industry to develop all around the world or in that specific country. So you can all just join in the conversation, I think.
Maybe I can say a few words about this. First of all, the point about policy uncertainty, when we say policy uncertainty, we include regulatory uncertainty on top. So when we do the forecast, if there is a policy target of Saudi Arabia of 200 gigawatt solar PV, we do not include them because it will not be implemented, we know already. So just to clarify on that one. In terms of the market design, I think COVID-19 really makes the situation in the overall wholesale electricity markets and how they are not fit for wind and solar PV showing us very well. I think, again, this is, to me, a big fast forward to the future, because if we are pushing for more energy efficiency, more wind and solar, a spot market with day-ahead pricing scheme in the summer will not work. I mean, especially I'm saying in the summer because of during midday peak of PV and in the windy days. So what kind of solutions there are in the markets? Right now at the IEA, we have not seen any country introduced a very, how can I say, sustainable solution to that. So to me, it doesn't exist. There were good examples that basically scaled back. So Mexico was a good one. But now it's basically stopped without testing the actual regulation because the government decided to scale back from the market reform. So we will not see the results of this, but it had a good balance between a long-term contracts and short-term balancing in the market, which renewables need. Because without any long-term price visibility, neither wind nor PV projects will invest with pure merchant risk because the investment cycle of these projects are different than fossil fuels. Everything needs to be invested upfront. So in the solution, there needs to be a long-term contract structure, which obviously the pure market views don't like, because if you have a long-term contract, which means you distort the market, but some of the people are free to put capacity markets into the picture, which are also a long-term contract. So I think we need to have this balance of long-term contracts versus a short-term balancing, where renewables also need to be responsible, which is happening already now, and otherwise, the wholesale market will suffer further with the increasing share of renewables. And in Spain, especially, when you give 10 gigawatt of additional wind and solar in the coming 2-3 years, in a market where the total capacity is what, 50 gigawatts? I don't remember the exact number, but it's a significant increase. So the prices will be depressed for a very long time. And it's not good for anybody. low gas prices is also not good for the gas producers, by the way. So, I mean, they don't make money either. So it's that's why the design needs to adopt certain kind of long-term pricing by not locking in fossil fuels as well. So, because when you enter into an equal long-term pricing, you can lock in many fossil fuels without generating. So there needs to be a balance on that one, but we don't see a good example in the world yet.
Mm-hmm. You want to add up to that, the three panelists?
I was looking for the figure, but the PNIEC, the national plan, it gives the number of 11% for PV in 2030. But I think that the future is now, because in May, PV has been 9.3% of the electricity in Spain. So we are not having to wait longer to see everything you have been saying, because as I said, the future is now.
Well,
yeah. Sorry.
No,
Heymi,
Alejandro, go ahead.
No, please.
No, the reflection is that in the power demand has decreased about 7.8% in Spain. The demand will probably start to recover from the end of the summer, maybe, but we don't know where it's going to be. It looks like it's not going to grow very much, not for the moment. On the other hand, the fossil fuel for transportation has gone down 60% in April. So, but that demand is going probably to come back sooner or later. That's for sure. So, what we are trying to do in the power sector, where we already have 50% of renewables at the moment, is of course it's hard because we are going against these low prices that you were mentioning, Heymi, and therefore we need to have these stabilization policies for the income of new installations. But on the other hand, we definitely need to start working on electrification of, for instance, transportation, because otherwise the main let's say the sector that emits more in Spain, which is transportation, will go back where it was after the COVID, and we haven't achieved nothing in that point, and we have not gone any step further on the decarbonization path. If we have to increase the need for green electricity at the same time that we are installing more PV and wind. That would be the easy way of doing it. If we just increase more and more and more renewables without increasing the demand, it's going to be harder and harder to organize it. So we need to, other sectors start taking some responsibilities to reduce emissions. And you can do it, but you need to electrify. And that's something where the governments needs to step in and say, okay, from now on, we need only I mean, not only, but mainly promote green, electricity cars electrical transportation in general.
Alejandro, please.
Yeah, I was just saying it's true that we all agree on two points. It's pointless to go 100% renewables in the electricity sector if electricity is still I don't know the exact figure, but below 20% in the energy, the primary energy mix. That is sure, and we all, from the decarbonization point of view, that's a long way to go still for our country. We have progressed a lot in electricity generation. We have a system that now, just now, as Javier was saying, was working perfectly smoothly with 60 and 70% of renewables, thanks to the Spanish system operator, which was of the pioneers on this. And we know how to do this in the electricity sector. We also have good companies that go abroad and do projects abroad. But the problem is not for Spain. The decarbonization agenda is not on this electricity generation side. That's true. That's completely clear. And on the other thing about the market, it's true that we in this thing is kind of funny because we kind of agree more or less in the diagnosis, but none of us has really a proposal because we don't know. It's like an abyss. We don't know what's beyond marginalism. It's kind of it's like when Copernicus said, okay, no, the sun is in the center of the universe. And now we are displacing marginalism from the center of the universe. And we don't know, we are kind of lost. We don't know how to travel now. But we, for example, from UNEF, we say that it's true. We need completely to reformulate, to rethink this market. We need to provide long-term signals, maybe through auctions with some degree of market exposure, so we don't completely separate these two things, and so that the projects see the signal and have incentives to produce when they should. But it's true, we need to introduce some kind of long-term signals because it's pointless to have a perfectly working marginalist market with technologies without marginal costs.
Alejandro, there is one slide that I want to share, and it's the final energy consumption in Spain in 2018, and electricity is only 22%. So we are trying to achieve 70% or whatever you want in 2030, but the bigger problem is not the electricity, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of questions dealing with something related with PPAs. Basically, how has COVID affected PPAs and low prices affected PPAs, and how do you say like corporate PPAs and PPAs in general in the future, in the world and in Spain also?
Quickly in the world, there are still PPAs signed during the COVID-19. And it was actually in the first quarter, the corporate PPA signed globally was much higher than in 2020 than in 2019, slightly. Obviously, we don't know exactly which months these were signed, but one of the reasons was not COVID. As you know, the largest market for corporate PPAs is the United States. And most of the companies were rushing to sign these PPAs to develop projects to take the incentives. So I think we will see the COVID-19 impact on corporate PPAs in the Q3, Q4, and see how that goes, because this is directly related to the demand.
Heymi, Javier, Alejandro, you want to add something up?
Well, yes, of course. We had been following the evolution of futures in the power market even before the PPA. The COVID, and the problem that we were seeing is the price of gas was going down already before Christmas, and that was pushing the future prices lower, quite lower. In Spain, we had, before, let's say, until mid of last year, we had nice prices in the future with prices between 45 and 50 euros per megawatt hour until 2025, 26. And that was giving a very nice signal for making PPAs, because most of the PPAs could be closed at somewhere between 38, 42. And that's for current technologies, renewable technologies, is a nice price if you can get it for 10, 15 years. But the fact is, after that, as we were saying here before, there has been this double, let's say, catastrophe. Well, not catastrophe. It was a double whammy, where both the gas price has plummeted to less than 5 euros per megawatt hour thermal, and also the demand has plummeted. So the futures are now somewhere between 40 and 42, and that is putting pressure on the PPAs, of course. And if you want to close a PPA nowadays, it has to be much lower than before, and with more uncertainty also because of the lack of, we can't see when the power demand is going to be recovered fully. I mean, into this 7.8%, and when it looks like it's going to take a few years, probably, because also I suspect, this is my opinion, I suspect that also the way we work and we move and everything will change a little bit from the pre-COVID crisis. So the energy use might be different than what it was before. So we'll see. But in any case, yeah, the pressure on PPAs is high because the prices, the future prices are lower, and the expectations are not for them to go much higher. And in any case,
completely agree.
Okay, Javier, you asked a question about access to the grid and the problem that we're facing in Spain.
Yes, we are having a problem here in Spain with the access to the grid, because there are lots and lots and lots of megawatts asking for connection. But if you have all of these projects into account, there are more than the double that you need for fulfill your goals for 2030. So we are seeing the same problem all over the world, or it's only a Spanish, because Spain is different?
This is a Spanish bubble, Heymi.
Well, but there is a little bit of this in few countries the same way. One is Turkey. Turkey has actually a big application of wind and solar projects, but whether they are real or not, nobody knows, and you see that they are not being realized. Another issue was in Japan under the feed-in tariff. There is a big pipeline of projects that are qualified for the feed-in tariff but cannot get grid connection because these were not real projects. In terms of the policy perspective, this is obviously a bit tricky for the government and how to assess what is real, what is not. But a good policy example actually came from Japan. Japan said that if you want a grid connection, bring me the business plan, bring me the actual project with the details, bring me your pre-agreements with the suppliers, give me some kind of how can I say, an indication that you will do this project. The same policies in the United States. If you want to qualify for tax credits, you need to show an initial investment at a certain period of time, or you have to keep investing in the 4-year period in order to be able to eligible. So like a normal project. So you start with pre-development, measurement, and then you move. So these policies exist. In the lack of these policies, globally, you will see immediately a rush of projects, real or unreal, of bubble, as Arcadio described, that it's very difficult for the government to understand whether these investors are serious or not. So there are policy tools, and these policy tools are used and are successful. Even in Japan, the Japan promised these companies to provide feed-in tariffs. So even under this limitation, they canceled the projects which were not serious at all to be commissioned.
Okay.
Thank you.
There is a question on hydrogen also. They're asking if you think hydrogen is seriously taken into account for the future energy scenarios.
The quick answer is yes, but the biggest question is when. I can tell you already what we hear from the governments. They are seeing hydrogen as an important future of decarbonization. I didn't say green hydrogen, but hydrogen. Also renewables coming to the picture with we hear the stimulus plans, including this kind of green hydrogen measures. because its technology is known. So electrolyzers and how to transform this energy to hydrogen is not a rocket science. And it's an area where you need scale up. It's like old times of PV. You had very small capacities. When things are scaled up, you saw an incredible thing. So that's why this coronavirus stimulus packages on energy could be a good facilitator for this kind of a big money to be invested in projects that can scale up this green hydrogen. European Union is definitely discussing this for sure, with offshore connection with the offshore and very cheap renewables. And I will believe that Spanish solar PV utility scale sector in the south will be a good candidate, because it's one of the cheapest in Europe of producing solar PV actually. So it can be an option. And considering that the connection between Spain and France is still limited, so it could be a facilitator. But you need big projects for this. It can't be small scale test projects for the cost efficiency.
If I may add something on that, we have been following the discussion on hydrogen closely in Europe, and it seems everything is nice as long as you're talking about green hydrogen. But then when you start talking about blue hydrogen with capture and storage of the CO2, and then also gray hydrogen, and then all these projects that are in line to get funding, you get a little bit the impression that we are putting the cart before the horses, in the sense that what demand do we have for hydrogen is in refineries and for ammonia, basically. And those, for those industries, they already have their own suppliers of hydrogen. So whatever we are doing with the green hydrogen, if we do green, is additional. And it's more expensive than the one that is being done, that is called so-called gray hydrogen, because it comes from fossil fuels. And that you emit a lot of CO2 when you produce that hydrogen. So if the new hydrogen doesn't have anybody to consume it, we have a problem. I mean, we have all these investments in something that there is no consumption, because the consumers that need hydrogen, they already have their own suppliers that are cheaper.
And
so
one thing to it, Heikki, I definitely agree with you on this one. To be, I mean, this more expensive. I agree, and I would like to add another challenge on top is the storage technology. If we see cheap storage on top of this developing at the same time, why would anybody do green hydrogen? Because if you can store the electricity in a massively cheap way and generate in the day after at night, you actually, the grid integration and this excess generation of the variable renewables argument goes into the garbage a little bit on top of this.
Yeah, but of course, what you could think is that you will give some kind of, put some price on gray hydrogen because of the emissions it creates, and so make green hydrogen competitive with gray hydrogen, so that the actual consumers of this hydrogen switch from gray to green. And that would be, but now that we are talking in Europe, there is a lot of talk to create this demand of hydrogen in some other sectors, like in transportation, which could make sense in some areas, like some rail issues, carriage of heavy goods, maybe in ships. But then, still there is a long, as you were saying at the beginning, the question is when. There's still a long way before we have a lot of demand of green hydrogen. For the moment, the problem is that it's much cheaper to produce it with fossil fuels. So we need to really, and also because of the relationship with electrification that I was mentioning before, you need to see how long you can get with direct electrification, and then maybe start thinking about green hydrogen. Because if you start promoting cars that use hydrogen, then you are taking away some part of the natural market for batteries. And it's not efficient, because actually a battery-driven car nowadays is much more efficient than one driven with hydrogen. So the policies need to be clear, and politicians need to have a clear idea on when they want to go and when with hydrogen. But we are trying to work on that.
Heikki, you were talking about the storage and batteries, but hydrogen could be also used to inject it into the pipeline of Enagas. We had a webinar with Maria Cecilia from Enagas, and she said that there are some uses of the natural gas that cannot admit any percentage of hydrogen, but some of the uses could admit until 10% without big problems. So maybe the injection directly into the pipeline of existing natural gases pipeline could be a solution, not in the short term, but in the middle term, because the prices of hydrogen compared to natural gas now cannot stand.
Sorry, Heikki.
No, go ahead, Alejandro.
I was just thinking I had just one idea. I mean, we as it happens with biofuels and this kind of things, is some way to green the consumption of hydrocarbons. Maybe we could do something similar. I don't know, Heymi, if you have heard of minimal content of green hydrogen in already hydrogen consumers. That could be an idea to get on few by few, scaling up these facilities and introducing the green hydrogen and making greener the gray hydrogen. And the other thing is, it's true that I don't see batteries and hydrogen as competing for storage, because I think it's different application for storage. Because, for example, now in Spain, in these spring months, we have really high irradiation, but we don't have much electricity consumption, because we don't need still the air conditioning, and it is mild temperatures during night, and we typically May, June, September, October are months of low electricity consumption. So maybe in these months, we have an excess of electricity generation by solar PV or other sources, and hydro or wind. We also have very windy days during these days. So we could use hydrogen for a longer term storage of electricity in energy, for monthly storage, if you want, and batteries for the flexibility services to the grid, you know.
Yeah, I think the first part on demand, definitely agree. A policy intervention on the demand side could actually create the thing, but at what cost? That's the question. What is the cost right now? And that's the first part. That using transport is really a big policy in Japan. Hydrogen using transport. That is actually an interesting, I mean, they have been betting on this as an industry for a very long time, so they will keep pushing that. They even consider, you will be extremely surprised, but investing in Australia, hydrogen, cheap hydrogen, green hydrogen plants, and ship it to the Japan to basically produce electricity from hydrogen turbines to reproduce them. Now, even this is considered in the longer term, because Japan is an island country, energy security issues, blah, blah, blah. So that is the part. The second part on the transport, and again, the question is what cost? In what period of time and what cost that you will transform that green electricity to electrolyzers and ammonia to transport them to, it's not very, instead, why don't we use pump storage, you know, existing pump storage facility, or or other, if you change the market design, all these reservoir hydro capacity that we have in the world, which is used not for reservoir, not for storage, but just for generating bulk electricity, because market design does not enable that, it's cheaper. I mean, it's much cheaper than anything else that you can use. So I think it falls down to, again, the market design and how we change the market design to value storage. And before coming to this hydrogen, storing it on the long term, you have a lot of, I think, other technologies. They may come at a cheaper price than this. But we may see a breakthrough like solar PV, and then prices goes down very fast. Obviously, the picture changes, but we do not expect this to happen in the coming 5 years. So.
Thank you, Heymi. We're already half an hour over time, so I'm going to ask you this one last question. So if you were able to design the perfect auction, how would you do it?
Good question.
Okay. So, first of all, I will, how I will design it. First of all, I will basically look at the grid first. I wouldn't design an auction. I will design an auction based on grid availability, because otherwise you keep the uncertainty. So you basically, as a government, like they do in offshore wind sector, they say, okay, so this is the plan for the expansion of the grid. This is what we are going to invest. And in these areas, we are opening an auction, allocation of the capacity. And then we allocate X amount of capacity that we will auction. And in Spain, specifically, will I do a wind and solar PV auction separately? I would. Why? Because their generation profiles are different. You need both. If you make them compete, you may see that solar PV is beating wind big time in multiple ways. So I think that will be a good, because they complement each other in terms of the generation, as far as I know. So I think generating the separate technology specific ones for wind and solar would be a good option. I will definitely put a ceiling price and do a Dutch auction, which means to bidding back. But I will design the auction in such a way that requirements to enter to the auction will prevent the overbidding, which means that you bid, but you reach the limit. So on that sense, I will demand certain kind of real project information before entering into the auction. And this also prevents people selling the projects afterwards. So you see in many markets that they open the auction, people enter, and they don't have a project, they just sell the projects afterwards. So, and these delay basically the project. The next one that I will put a commissioning deadline. I'll put a commissioning deadline that the auction projects needs to be commissioned in X date. This is already existing. And I will do the style in terms of CFD, contract for difference, because governments are worried about subsidies. So if the things goes up, they pay less. If it goes down, they pay more. This kind of a CFD situation will give a little bit of certainty to both sides, both the investors and actually the government, who is paying for that.
The panelists, if they want to add up something in 1 minute to what Heymi said.
Yeah, we need, at least from the power sector, you would need to have some kind of leverage on the administration in order for not to take too long, all the administrative process. In the European Union, the directive is trying to do that, the Renewables Directive, by establishing a certain, I think it was 1.5 years, I think 2 years to get all the permits, maximum time.
2 years.
Sorry?
2 years.
2 years, no? But how can we, as private sector, how can we actually enforce that? That's the question. There is no way we can say, okay, you have 2 years to give me all the permits if I do things right. But we don't have that, and that's the problem with the auctions. you can design it as well as you want, but of course, if you put the pre-qualification criteria to have all the permits, like in Germany, then you might have a problem because there is not enough competition, because not everybody wants to invest so much in getting all the permits. So this is something that we need to talk more about and say, okay, we want to help the administration, but the administration has to help us also in order to achieve the objectives.
Okay. Javier, Alejandro, something?
Yes. The perfect auctions is something very difficult, but one of the ideas is specific auctions depending on your future mix, taking into account the maturity of the projects. That it's something that we haven't done in Spain. Having energy price as the main character of the film, but also things in another supportive roles like the distance between production and consumption, the use of the grid, and all the positive externalities that usually we don't take into account when we do an auction. There are a lot of technologies that in specific regions of Spain would be very good to develop the economics of this region and to create new jobs. And those things are not taken into account by the Ministry of Energy.
Thank you, Javier. Alejandro.
Yes, very shortly. Well, we believe it's a compromise. It's a compromise between strong pre-qualification and a lot of agents going to the auction. We believe in a strong pre-qualification, so you don't need this special treatment from the administration, because the project that goes to a PPA or goes to an auction or goes merchant should have the same treatment from the administration. But it's true that if we have more filter at the projects that go to the auction, you have a previous selection of projects, you are more or less sure that most of them are going to be connected to the grid. And regarding the remuneration, we believe in pay as bid, of course, because there shouldn't be any over-retribution or some strategic behavior the bids of the auction.
Okay, thanks. Arcadio, I think we're done here.
Okay, there are another question here for the far offshore wind, no? About this, Heymi, asking you about the future of offshore wind and the...
I mean, we are over time, but one sentence. Offshore
just 1
wind
minute to wrap up.
So offshore wind is less affected in the short term, but in the longer term, European targets remain, and actually they are they are higher in the recent announcement. So that's a good news. But in other parts where it was emerging in the United States, offshore wind auctions in New York and Massachusetts were postponed. So that they're supposed to do because of the uncertainty. In China, the development is slower than expected, and COVID-19 puts pressure on the phasing out of subsidy of offshore wind in 2022. So offshore wind in the short term, no impact. Longer term depends on the policies.
Okay, thank you very much, Heymi. Thank you very much, all of you. Ana, Javier, Alejandro, Heiki, Pablo. Heymi, it's a pleasure having you here. I think you will come after this COVID-19. I think in September, October, in the regular time for putting out this report. And enjoy your time here, there in Paris. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming to this section.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.